Wow, you aren't kidding about those deep dives, huh? Falcon Patrol for the Commodore 64. Now, this is taking me back.
Back to the 8-bit.
You said it. And the sources you've dug up, it's like a time capsule. We've got YouTube reviews, like wildly different takes on the game.
From what I saw, yeah, people have some strong opinions.
And then a deep dive on the C64 wiki. Someone went all out there.
Seriously comprehensive. Some real gems in that one.
And to top it off, a vintage game review, 1983.
Oh, that's a blast from the past.
I'm impressed. Okay, so for those of us who maybe don't have a Commodore 64 warming up right now, set the scene. What is Falcon Patrol? What are we getting into?
Okay, so picture this. You're the last pilot, right? And you're defending these crucial airfields. Wave after wave of enemy jets are coming at you. Your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to take them down. That's Falcon Patrol. In a nutshell, it's one of those classic horizontally scrolling shooters. So the action unfolds from side to side. Simple, pure arcade action.
You say simple, and I get it. It's a classic formula. But I've gone through the reviews you sent, and the word that keeps popping up, brutal.
Yeah.
What makes Falcon Patrol so challenging? Even seasoned gamers were saying this one is tough.
Well, there's the control scheme you're maneuvering your jet with, just a joystick.
Old school cool.
Right, you gotta love that.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. As the enemy waves increase, it gets seriously chaotic. And then there's the refueling mechanic.
Oh, yeah, the refueling. Literally every single review mentioned that.
Yeah, it's a make-or-break moment.
You have to land to refuel, but when you do, you are a sitting duck.
Totally. That constant tension risk versus reward, that's what elevates it beyond just a simple shooter. It's brilliantly designed.
So we've got simple controls, but this really intense, almost addictive gameplay. Okay, let's talk about how it looks, because some of these YouTube reviewers did not hold back.
Let's just say the graphics are a point of contention.
That's one way to put it.
Some people call them simplistic.
Yeah.
Even for the Commodore 64. And look, I get it. C64 had its limitations.
Oh, for sure.
But then you have other reviewers who are pointing out the detail in the jet animation, even with those limitations. And they're right. Those developers, they squeezed every ounce of power out of that hardware.
They found a way. And isn't that part of the charm of these older games? Seeing what they could accomplish?
Totally. And they created this real feeling of speed, of flight, even if the landscape scrolling, gets a little...
jittery.
Yeah, let's go with jittery.
But you know what everyone seemed to agree on?
What's that?
The sound. Those engine noises. So good.
Oh, absolutely incredible. They really pull you right into the cockpit.
You really feel like you're right there in the action.
And what's amazing is how they did it. I mean, this is the Commodore 64. We're not talking fancy sound cards or anything.
Right?
They were working with, essentially, a glorified synthesizer chip.
They worked wonders with that sound chip, it's true. But let's talk about Falcon Patrol's legacy, because it's fascinating. Not every review called it a masterpiece, but everyone seemed to have played it. Why was that?
That's where your research takes us from the technical stuff to something, I don't know, almost sociological. You send over this amazing wiki article, all in German, talk about thorough. And it reveals something really interesting about how Falcon Patrol was perceived back in the day. It wasn't just a game. It was practically unavoidable.
Like you couldn't escape it.
Pretty much. It was on practically every game disc, almost a default inclusion, And that tells us something crucial about the whole Commodore 64 culture. Sharing was everything back then.
Right, making copies, trading games. It was how you built your library.
Exactly. Games were copied, traded, shared. It was part of the experience. And Falcon Patrol became this common ground. Everyone had played it, so it was a shared point of reference. It's almost impossible to imagine that today.
It's a totally different world. We've gone from sharing floppy disks to these massive multiplayer experiences online.
You make a good point. Did we lose something along the way? Maybe. That shared history, those common gaming experiences, those were unique to that time. But hey, while we're on the subject of unique, something else caught my eye in these sources. Steve Lee, the programmer, his little fact sheet on the C64 wiki. Birdwatching, okay, I get it, but fasting, that's our programmer.
Wait, seriously?
Yeah. Makes you wonder what life was like back then for game developers. Forget these giant studios with hundreds of people. This was often one person, alone in their room with their computer, pouring all their quirks and passions into their creation.
And sometimes those quirks ended up in the game. I love it. So those little details in Falcon Patrol, the difficulty spikes, even the sound design, that might be pure Steve Lee. It's almost like we're getting a glimpse into this whole other creative process.
It's like archaeology, but for pixels instead of ancient pottery, right?
Yeah.
We're sifting through these layers of history, trying to understand the past. And Steve Lee's little bio, as you said, it's a tiny window into that world.
Yeah.
I love it.
You can't help but appreciate how far game development has come. But there's a part of me, and maybe it's just nostalgia talking, that misses that scrappy DIY spirit. It had a certain charm.
For sure, there's a charm to it. That sense of a game being one person's vision, even with the flaws. And speaking of flaws, should we talk about the collision detection, maybe?
Oh yeah, a few reviews mention that.
More than a few.
It sounds like those missiles of yours had a tendency to pass right through the enemy jets. Not ideal in a shoot 'em up.
Not ideal at all. And even people who enjoyed the game found it frustrating. Some chalk it up to the technology of the time, but others just call it sloppy programming.
Which I guess brings up something important about reviewing these older games. Nostalgia is a powerful thing.
It really is. What one person might see as a charming quirk, another person is ready to throw their joystick at the screen. It all depends on your expectations.
That being said, even the most glowing reviews you sent, they weren't calling Falcon Patrol some lost masterpiece, were they? It seemed more like, hey, this is good for a quick blast of nostalgia.
Yeah, and that's fair. To be fair, back in the 8-bit era, games didn't have to be these sprawling epics to be enjoyable. Sometimes a simple addictive loop, that was enough. And Falcon Patrol definitely delivered on that front.
It's true, even with its quirks, Falcon Patrol had that just one more go quality. You get sucked in.
Totally. There's something about that simple but solid game design. It's still engaging, even with all its limitations. And you know what? Maybe those limitations are part of the appeal.
How so?
Well, it reminds us that you don't need cutting-edge graphics or super complex gameplay to create a fun experience. Sometimes, less is more.
It's about the feeling it evokes, right? The challenge, the intensity. Which leads to the big question, would Falcon Patrol resonate with gamers today? Could it find an audience in this day and age?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? But think about it. We've got this whole generation raised on pixel art and chiptune soundtracks.
So true. That retro aesthetic is everywhere.
Exactly. And games like, say, Stardew Valley or Shovel Knight, they prove that there's a real appetite for that classic gameplay.
Right. People love it. So maybe Falcon Patrol could fit right in.
Especially with that difficulty level. It could find an audience. But let's be real. The gaming market right now, it's flooded. Even with its retro charm, could Falcon Patrol stand out? It's tough to say.
It really is. It makes you wonder, though. What if someone remastered it? Updated the graphics, gave it a modern sound design, maybe even added some quality of life improvements. Could that breathe new life into it?
Maybe. Or maybe it's best left as is. A time capsule. A reminder of a different era in gaming.
I can see that. Appreciate it for what it was and what it tells us about how far games have come.
Absolutely.
Wow. This whole thing has been fascinating. It really makes you think about using the past to understand the future of gaming.
That's what these deep dives are all about. It's not about judging a game as good or bad. It's about what we can learn from it.
Well said. So, to our listeners out there, what do you think? What would happen if we put Falcon Patrol back out in the world as is? Would it soar? Or would it crash and burn? I guess there's only one way to find out. Maybe it's time to dust off that emulator, fire up Falcon Patrol, and take a trip back to 1983. Let us know what you think. Until next time, happy gaming.